that I've put some links in the chat window, including a link to the conversation we had. Judy, time flies. That conversation was in 2020, not 2018. I know, right?
Wow. Wow.
And it was you and Jeff and the author, David George Haskell. It was a great talk. So that link is there, as well as a link to your organization. And I urge people to not only read more about Judy's work, but support it. So I'm going to turn, before we talk about how that work has impacted, I know you work closely with Jodyann. I thought, Jeff, you could maybe share a little bit about your work and sort of build on some of the insights that Judy has shared with us.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much, David and Judith, for inviting me into your circle and for inviting me to participate in this talk. It's an honor and a inspiration to share the Zoom world, the Zoom networks with you all, and hear about all your amazing work. It's truly inspiring for me. And I remember leaving our last talk in 2020, feeling really inspired, Judith, about all the great work that you've done with your organization and creating access to the great outdoors. So I'm on the faculty at Lesley University, which is in Cambridge, and this is, I think, my 12th or 13th year on the faculty there. And my main interest area in both in teaching and in research is around the concept of nature connection. So I teach a course called Eco-Psychology. I also teach a course called Children in Nature. I taught a first-year seminar for a while called Born to be Wild, about individuals experiencing deep nature wilderness settings. And a lot of my community work has actually taken place outside of the university and working with organizations that are trying to facilitate opportunities for folks to access the great outdoors and to access green spaces and to cultivate green spaces in the city of Boston. And so I began starting out trying to measure this idea of nature connection, with not because I thought it was a very exciting area of research to actually quantify nature connection, but because I thought it was important, and that organizations really needed a way to operationalize or to measure how they were delivering their programs. In other words, if we're trying to get folks to have more access to nature and to more deeply connect with nature, how do we quantify that? How do we measure that? So when we're writing grant applications to agencies that are going to fund our programs, that they can actually see from one year to the next, or from one program year to the next, that there's actually an improvement. And as all of you know that are working in the nonprofit world, the metrics are so important. And it was really less about STEAM and STEM, and it was more about connection. STEAM and STEM are, of course, important, and it's not meant to belittle that, but there's so much research and so much energy that's being spent around measuring kids in particular, and how they're doing in those areas. But how are we measuring folks' connection and their emotional connection to these natural spaces? And so I spent a lot of time working with organizations, City Sprouts in particular in Cambridge and Boston, that works with school garden programs in both Cambridge and Boston public schools, and providing kids with gardens on school grounds that they can actually, teachers can work with students to deliver curriculum in these garden spaces. And some other organizations that I've really worked with in trying to measure their program outcomes. And there's been a little bit of a shift recently in terms of thinking really deeply about issues of equity and access, which Judith talked about, which are so pivotal to this conversation. And I think COVID, like in so many of our other areas, really put a magnifying glass on so many of these inequities, in particular in terms of access to healthcare, access to educational resources, but also access to nature. And so that's really become a focus in a lot of my teaching, and starting to become more of a focus in some of the organizations that I'm working with, is that how do we address these inequities? How do we make it so that kids that are living in neighborhoods such as Dorchester and Mattapan aren't just participating in environmental education programs for one day that are out in Lincoln, or out in Lexington or out in Concord, and then they're transported back to their home environments where they don't see any trees or any plants or any gardens, and they see nature as sort of this utopian experience that's inaccessible to them on 364 days of the year. And that to me is really problematic. And so trying to work with folks and looking at that and examining that, and to what extent are we making folks that live in those communities not believe that nature is for them, and not believe that nature exists in their own communities. So it's inspiring for me to hear the work of Judith and David in really working in these neighborhoods where there's so much great potential and so much importance in having, especially kids, adults as well, but having equitable access. And how does that connect to transportation, right? How does that connect to the whole infrastructure of the way our cities are working as a system? So I'll stop there, just because I don't want to take up too much time.
I have one question I have something that I really need you to talk about, Jeffrey.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you wrote about effective responses to natural environments. Can you just talk about that a little bit, how that relates to not having enough nature exposure for people who live in the inner cities?
Yeah, there's so much research that has really been in the last probably 20 or 30 years has really looked at what are the, and I'm particularly interested in the psychological impacts. There's been a lot of research, obviously, on the physical health impacts as well, but on the psychological health of a community. And I'll just touch upon one area because I know that we'll probably revisit this in the hour, but one in particular area that I think is so important is that nature spaces and green spaces in urban areas builds community, right? Because it's a place for folks to come, and it's a healthy place for folks to come. And we see the impacts of community gardens and community parks, and where people can actually go and sort of unwind and be with one another. And maybe they're collaborating, maybe they're planting together, maybe they're socializing together. But that's, if people don't have a place to go, community can't be built. And so apart from that element, which is of course so important, we see all of these other psychological effects of being out in nature: the stress reduction, reduction in anxiety, just the idea that people can actually pay attention better when they're in natural environments. We can talk about concepts such as soft fascination. So there's been just a whole host of research that shows that these spaces are so important. And I think that we've focused a lot historically on the physical health pieces, right? In relation to asthma. We know that the asthma rates in communities such as Dorchester and Mattapan are about 6 or 7 times the asthma rates in communities such as Brookline. And why is that, right? Why is it that our public transportation systems in those areas tend to be buses that are idling sometimes in parking lots for hours and hours and hours? And why is it in other communities that they get clean rail systems that aren't having any diesel exhaust or any CO2 emissions coming out of them? So pieces like that, we can understand and we can quantify them. But now we're actually starting to look at the psychological pieces too, that are of course so closely connected to that. And loneliness is another big one. We're seeing an epidemic of loneliness. And if folks have these social spaces to go, some of those negative effects of loneliness can actually be somewhat mitigated.
The American Progress actually just put out a study and numbers. It's called the Nature Gap. If you guys have not looked at that, I suggest that everyone on this Zoom take a look at this. It's readily available. Just Google the Nature Gap and you'll see all the evidence and scientifically based numbers to back up what Dr. Perrin has said.
Thank you for that, Judith. I just actually quickly Googled it and dropped it in the link in the chat. I think that's the right link. Thank you both. And there was something I wanted to amend here, Jeff, but now I can't remember. Oh, I know what it was. When I first started down this journey, I had a friend, Doug Larkin, who shared with me an article he wrote. He's a science educator. And the title of the article, and you're welcome to read it, is, quote, Before today, I was afraid of trees. Or rethinking nature deficit disorder. It was about the story he's telling about a young woman, high school junior, who went on a field trip in her neighborhood and got to understand trees and confessed after the trip. But she was afraid of them, is that they are big and scary, right? And they can give us a sense of awe. They're awesome, but that awesomeness can be frightening. So, I think how do you confront that as part of the psychology? And they can be humbling. So I just wanted to sort of, you spark a memory in my brain. So Catherine, nice to see you, and hope to see you soon. All right, Jodyann, I know you have amazing
Love you,
stories,
Catherine.
amazing stories to share as well about your work with Judith and your own personal journey. So the floor is yours, as they say.
Okay, well, hi, my name is Jodyann Hanson. I am also Jamaican-born, first-generation immigrant to the United States. I am right now enrolled in William James in the clinical psychology program, minoring or specifying in Afro-Caribbean mental health counseling. So a lot of the things that you guys are all talking about, it's directly correlated to everything that I'm learning, everything that I'm kind of gearing my career towards. So it's all very interesting. So when I first got introduced to Judy in 2018, she was the one that kind of exposed me to a mindful connection or a mindful way to access nature. Coming from Jamaica, I was born in one of the city areas. So growing up, even in Jamaica, we had kind of like a separate, nature is for, farmers. So we don't do that thing. We came from farming, we kind of got into the city life, and we kind of separated from that. Migrating to the US, I feel like it was kind of similar to Judy. I realized that there weren't a lot of fruit trees. And there was a curiosity there as to why not. There's a lot of homeless people that, I grew up around, that I grew up seeing in Connecticut, where I felt like it would be beneficial and make sense. That's the same thing that happens in Jamaica. Why doesn't it happen here? But when Judy kind of introduced me to a different way of seeing and experiencing nature, it kind of opened up my mind to how I can actually gear my psychological practice to that. Going into school and all that stuff, I've kind of realized that what she's talking about is more of a collaborative therapy perspective, where she is utilizing an individual's life experiences to gear how she works with each person. So no one thing fits each person. And it's such a great topic, and it's so amazing to think about the fact that there is one way that each person can connect, regardless of whether or not they speak the same language. So a lot of I'm sorry, I'm a little bit nervous. I don't talk to a lot of the things that I've been learning when it comes to therapy, when it comes to counseling, is a lot about experiences. It's a lot about experiential therapy. And one of the best ways that Judy has shown me that is to bring us into nature and to expose children to what that means. And I feel like within the Black communities, especially within Dorchester, I feel that there's a lot of situations where we might not have a proper example of how to experience nature. And I feel like that is one of the things that is really important. Being able to show individuals that there are natural spaces that are available to them, that they can access, and how they can access that has been beneficial to me, and all of the things that you guys are talking about is like popping into my head, and it makes me super excited about everything that's going on here. But yeah, like I am here in a very amazing learning space, and everything that you're talking about, Dr. Perrin, is a lot of where I'm gearing my practice to. And it's just so amazing to be able to sit here and soak all of that stuff up. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here and to listen to you guys.
Thank you all. What a inspirational set of, I should say, introductions to, or openings, invitations to this conversation. One thing immediately comes to mind for me, and I'd be curious to hear from each of you, and of course, people from the audience, feel free to chime in, is we've talked about these benefits, we've talked about your work in abstract terms. I'm wondering if you could share with us more, and pardon the pun, but more grounded examples, right? More rooted examples of how you do this work in practice, or how you've seen it done in the communities where you work, and maybe some of the impacts it's had.
I'll jump in. For me, when I started this, it was because of my own trauma. And cliche as it sounds, I'm not a Christian, but in response to something that Christians say, the comfort comes to the comforter, I found. And so it was purely selfish on my part that I started to do this, because I found, after doing a little bit of research, and just let me clarify, my son, Paul Anthony Fife, was murdered in 2013. And so that was part of my trauma that I had to address. And the best way for me was my mom sending me to Jamaica, where I experienced, rebirth, kind of going, where I picked fresh fruits. I walked bare feet, going to the water, to the rivers. Just being in the natural spaces brought me healing. And so I was challenged that whatever I'm doing, then I need to do that for other people as well. And so without the resources, I thought, the parks are free, open spaces are free for the most part. And I wanted to bring other people who I knew that were, having challenges and traumatic issues, whether it just be from living, from just life experiences, not necessarily the murder that I suffered and lost. But I found that the air. So I have stats to back it up, because everybody says, well, you need, scientific evidence to back up your statements, right? So we know that the air is also toxic, not just our water. So the toxic air can cause cancer, respiratory irritations, all sorts of issues with your cognitive situation. The doctors can speak better than than I can. However, from all of the violence, right, murders and folks just doing harm to other humans, seemingly out of the blue, right, without having a pre-diagnosed condition. So I thought to myself, this has to be a combination of things that are affecting people, right? How can we help to nurture folks into a better understanding of their physical, emotional, and their spiritual well-being in order to create a more balanced, they call it homeostasis, with your, you can handle stress, bounce back from disappointments and tragedies, where it doesn't overcome you to the point where you're wanting to act out or in negative ways. And so with all of this scientific information out there that proves not only are our species in danger, but we too are in danger on levels that are just now, as Dr. Perrin has said, being explored. So we know that the mental health crisis that we're in right now, pharmaceutical things and solutions or Band-Aid fixes don't work. And so I think that a broader approach to accessing nature in a safe, for Black folks especially, make sure that it's safe. And again, one of the examples of it not being safe for ordinary folks is the bird watcher in New York who was, you know, his life, to me, his life was threatened just for doing something that should be, as President Obama said, all of our shared birthright, nature, it's our shared birthright, he says. And so this is what motivates me, because again, we should have equal access and safe access to nature, no matter what community you live in. And so when I found, and again, forgive me for rambling on, but when I found this Cape Cod Healthy Parks, Healthy People initiative, I'm still confused how, you know, this isn't happening in Boston and Dorchester, Roxbury, and Mattapan.
So expanding on that a little bit, one of the projects that I was actually working on this semester was talking about how we would utilize experiential therapy to work with children that were going through divorce. Their parents are going through divorce, and how we would use experiential therapy to kind of facilitate that. One of the examples that we did use was wilderness therapy, and we were using the developmental perspective of the individual. Depending on where the child is at the point that the divorce happened, they can either reverse back developmentally, or they can act out depending on where they are. So one of the things that we spoke a lot about was to honor however the individual is acting out, and to utilize where they are developmentally to kind of help them within nature. So one of the examples was, if you had a 7-year-old boy that, you know, is acting out aggressively, and as a result of, you know, the divorce, you would kind of bring him out into nature, and you would have him kind of personalize, you know, what that feeling is at that time of divorce. This is definitely one of the experiences that Judy taught me, where you are bringing kids out into nature and you're having them explain, like, what does this thing feel like? Go out into nature and pick up something that feels like your anger, you know? So you are separating that 7-year-old boy from the anger itself, you know? And to be able to have him look back at that at a later point in time when he's feeling that way, he's going to be like, oh yeah, this is the big boo. That's not me. I know what to do here. I can take a breath and I can do this, you know? And this was one of the greatest examples of how we use wilderness therapy, or how we would use that therapeutically for individuals. This is all things that Judy has been doing for so many years. And I keep bringing it back to her because she's been the only example of this that I have seen ever. And I've been in the United States for over 22 years, and the level of exposure that I have gotten since 2018 with her has opened up my mind on exactly how I see the world, and how I'm able to connect what my experiences are based on my trauma, and to convert that in a way that's going to be beneficial for my community, you know, and to see exactly how a community might be acting out. You see little boys that are being diagnosed with attention deficit disorders in school, when all they might need to do is to do some emotional intelligence training. You know, they need to get out into nature and realize exactly what these emotions are, to depersonalize it from who it is that they are, so that they know exactly how to express it. They know what levels they go to. You know, if you at one point in time start to feel frustrated, you know that that's level one of you getting super, super angry. So, you know, the next step is that you are going to get, you know, fidgety. You know that your body is going to do a particular type of thing. You're getting all of these examples. You're getting all of these different warning signs. And to be able to teach these little boys that are in these at-risk communities, that is actually being trained to go into these school to prison pipelines, that they can actually utilize whatever it is that's going on and use the community that they're in to facilitate their healing. That is the biggest change that we can ask for. And all of this can be utilized within nature. And I don't see any other way experientially for us to be able to get so many different aspects or so many different cultures of children to learn and to progress in the same way on such a large scale, right? And it doesn't even talk solely about race. It's talking about the communities that you're in. It's talking about the access that you have to money. It's talking about the resources that you have to be able to say, oh yeah, mom, I want to go on Saturday to the park. Can you take the day off so that I can go somewhere when I know that you're working 16 to 18 hours on the weekend just so that I can have food on the table? You know, we need to be able to show them exactly how they can facilitate that for themselves. And that's one of the things that I have learned with Judy. And going into classes my first semester in grad school, this is what we're learning about. This is something that she's been normalizing for so long. For them to be able to get access to this kind of information from a psychological counselor, it's going to cost them so much money for them to do that when she's giving it out for free. You know, like this is the kind of thing to me that is so amazing that it took for me to go to grad school for me to understand this. And she's been doing this her whole entire life. Right? I'm not trying to blow up Judy's head or anything like that, but it is amazing how she can use a connection to nature to teach someone that is going through whatever traumatic experiences about appreciating nature, about advocating for nature. You know, the more you realize that we ourselves are nature, we are trees in ourselves that need to learn that we need to reboot ourselves. And the more we learn that, the more we're going to appreciate the trees themselves, the more we're going to stop damaging those things, the more we're going to think a little bit more mindfully about how we're utilizing and how we're abusing our communities. But
say that, nor did I pay her, I promise.
Well, there's so many strands that I could touch upon, Jodyann, in terms of what it was that you were speaking about, but I'll pick out a few. And one is that research time and time again shows us that the biggest predictor of one's connection to nature across the lifetime is childhood experiences in nature, not only time spent in nature, but the big one is mentorship. And so, you know, your story about, you know, a child asking their mother if they could take the day off to spend some time in nature with them. You know, we see how deeply embedded this issue is with all of these other issues of inequities. If people don't have time and they don't have energy and they don't have resources, how are they going to be able to be the ones that are mentoring their children's nature experiences? So, you know, that I talk a lot about in my classes that these roots of ecological devastation are the same roots of, you know, a lot of these patriarchal systems and inequities that we have within our society. They're all very tightly intertwined with one another. And sometimes when students start seeing that, oh, the way in which we oppress people of color or oppress women is the same seeds and roots is how we're treating the environment. It's all coming from the same foundational place. And sometimes students say like, oh, I thought these were all separate issues, right? I thought, you know, these were separate ways in which we could look at it. And it's like, there's a huge light bulb that goes off when they start seeing the interconnection between these pieces. Another element that I wanted to touch upon was this idea of seeing ourselves in nature, right? And there's a term in eco-psychology that's called ecological identity, right? So how much do we see ourselves as being part of nature versus separate from it? And there's all these different metrics where you can actually show kids, you know, sets of Venn diagrams where self and nature are separate, and then they're somewhat overlapped, and then they're totally overlapped. And to what extent do kids actually think that they are included and in relationship with nature? And
I would totally want that too, by the way. I'm sorry, I don't know me
to. Yeah, absolutely.
I would love access to that.
Oh yeah, I'll absolutely send it to you. It's easy because it's like the quickest metric that you could take. You know, it's just like it's a one question, one item measure. And you know, in getting back to the application that you were asking about, David, gardens, school gardens and community gardens are the great equalizer, because it lets, especially in the context of schools, it lets kids really have ownership over the process of actually putting seeds in the ground and caring for them and watering them and nurturing them and seeing the fruits of their labor, and also feeling the frustrations of their labor when things don't turn out the way they, and there's so many great lessons in there. But to go to visit these schools and to see kids, how excited they are about when they pull a carrot out of the ground, or how excited they are to see how high their pea plant grew, or how big their watermelon is. And to actually hear from the parents how when their kids are bringing this food home, and how it's actually changing the way these families are thinking about food and their relationship with food, because the kids are excited about, wow, I grew this. What can we do with it? How can we incorporate it into our meals? What recipes can we build with this food? And you just sort of see the spiraling effects. They're working together. They're developing empathy. They're starting to eat healthier. They're a lot of times teaching their siblings and their parents about healthy eating. So it's just the opportunities, and these plots can be really small and have really great impacts. So it just, in terms of fostering this connection and this relational way of being, because if we learn that relational way of being, as these individuals get older and older, they'll be more likely to be those stewards in their environments and to be the ones that want to protect and cultivate green spaces in the communities that they're a part of. And we need those folks. We need those folks that are concerned and that are going to act as stewards. And so it starts from a really young age of giving folks the opportunity and the mentorship. And the mentorship has to be intentional, right? It has to be people that are going to go out and be as curious as the kids are. If you go out with someone and they're on their phone the whole time, texting or doing whatever, the kid, to them, that what they're seeing from the adult, they are then going to model. It doesn't matter what the adult is saying to them, it's their behavior that is most important. So it's about also teaching mentors how to actually engage and be curious and be excited, and to sort of put the technology piece to the side, because it's just, that's what the kids are going to notice. They're not going to notice the things that they may be really curious about, that they're like, oh, if mom or dad or this teacher or mentor isn't curious about it, why should I be?
That also touches a little bit on some of my childhood experiences in Jamaica, right? I came to the United States when I was eight years old. When I was in Jamaica, I was running up and down barefooted with kids until the lights came on. Mind you, I just turned 30 in December. Anyone that I speak to about this would say that that is an old school way of growing up. Anyone that I talk to that is American, that has that experience, are in their late 50s, right? When I say that I would rather be outside, I don't like the computers, I don't like any of that stuff. I'd rather run around and do all of that stuff. That's how I grew up, right? That's just my foundation. That's the root of me. When I came to the US, everything started being inside, right? You couldn't go outside to play. There wasn't a lot of things going on. It might be dangerous because where you can afford to live, right, there might be a lot of crime going on. So now you have someone that was free to roam around and do everything that they wish to do in a safe environment, even though they claim that Jamaica is somewhere that is dangerous, right? And now you come to the US, and this is my perspective. I come to the US and now I'm inside. Now any game that I play is on a TV. Now every aspect of my entertainment is inside. Now any aspect of nature that I even had is being taken away because there is lack of access, right? And you get to a point where you start to see that even American society, children that are like you also have this negative connotation to nature. So that further reinforces the aspect that children my age are not supposed to be there, right? I grow up and I have the freedom to go out and I go camping, a Black girl going camping. And the comment that I get from any friends that I talk to about this is that's white people stuff. Why are you going to go and do that? You know? And when I really started to think about it, I started to think a little bit more about our history, about Afro history, about the fact that Black people running in the middle of the woods usually got shot and hung, right? Like, this has been the psychological trauma that has been ingrained over generations, right? Now you have an aspect where it's not you running and getting killed in the woods anymore, maybe, but it's the fact that you don't have an example of how to participate in nature. Now you have microaggressions to individuals that are participating in nature because you think that that's not something that they should be doing because it's not safe, right? So there's this whole entire cycle that keeps repeating itself. And when you really start to look at it from a psychological perspective, like it's something that when you have that level of microaggression from a large aspect of society, you're going to either fall in line or you're going to get kicked out of that society, right? So it's either you're going to be by yourself or you're going to fall in line. And that for some is the reality of nature. As sad as it sounds, that for some individuals is the reality of nature. And a lot of the things that you're talking about, Dr. Perrin, about individuals having access and having examples of this and having these programs where kids can experience nature and they can garden and they can get excited about nutrition all over again. These are things that I've seen a lot of other organizations, deep-rooted organizations in the middle of Dorchester, Boston, and what Hero is doing right now. And the problem is the people that are doing these things are not getting the funding and they're not getting the resources or the help that it is that they need to make a larger impact, right? Judith and Hero is the first nonprofit organization that I have ever volunteered in that I have actively worked in, right? And there's a reason because of that. There's the reason for that is because I'm invested. The mission that it is that she has, the mission that Hero has, is the same mission that I have for myself, right? The same things that she is doing, I am gaining a psychological vocabulary for, so that I can translate what is going on, so that people can see that what she's doing isn't foolishness, right? So that we can see that what Hero is doing right now needs more resources so that we can get bigger, so that we can do exactly what it is that we're talking about right now. Because it's not that it's not there, right? She's been talking about this since 2014, and you have somebody down in Cape Cod a year later that creates it. And now this is something that they're getting credit for, but nobody's sitting here talking about this with the fact that this was already spoken about a year prior. You see what I mean? Like this to me is the frustrating aspect of it, because to me, in my mind, as a first generation immigrant to this country, where I have a Jamaican woman that is directly giving me an experiential example of how it is that I am supposed to access nature, and I'm supposed to deal with my immigrant trauma, because mind you, migrating from one country to another is also ecological trauma to the individual. Nobody talks about that. Nobody talks about the fact that when you change from one environment to the next, that is traumatic for someone, especially when you're going through childhood. You're developing yourself. So now you got to a point where you solidified yourself in the environment that you're in. You're plucked out of that environment like a tree, like a tomato plant, and then you're put somewhere else where it does not help. It's not an environment that is supposed to grow tomatoes, but you're still expecting tomatoes to be beautiful, and you're still expecting tomatoes to be plump and juicy, and it doesn't work like that. And you have someone that has the nutrition and has everything that can change that soil into what it is that we need it to be, or to give you the tools for you to change the soil for wherever it is that you go for yourself. But we're not paying attention to that. I literally have to go to grad school for me to be able to get the vocabulary for me to sit here and say, oh my God, this is something that's actually going on. And when I sit here and give an example that Judy has shown me since 2018, my professors are telling me that this is something that has not even been researched yet. This is not peer reviewed. How is it not peer reviewed, but it's been normalized for me for over 4 years, 5 years? That to me is a problem, because we don't have representation for first generation immigrants that are dealing with this, that probably don't know how to find the resources to get access to nature, even if they wanted to. You know, like that is also something that we need to pay attention to.
Jodyann, it breaks my heart to interrupt you here because your words are so powerful and I want them to settle in. And I appreciate everything you're bringing to the table and how personal it is in this space. I did want to acknowledge the time, and I want to give folks an opportunity to chime in and share their thoughts and questions, because it is dinner time and I know lots of us have competing obligations. So I'm going to open the floor to anyone to sort of chime in and ask or reflect. We close up, get ready to close out.
Good evening. My name is Jackie. I am a family member, actually, and friend and volunteer with Judith here in Miami. As you'll see in my chat, I mentioned that she's also advocating this and working so hard, not just in Boston, but in Miami, which is one of her community as well, where we raised our children for the most part. So to advocate and to acknowledge what Jodyann is saying, definitely this is something that has been going on, has been there, has been at least spoken about and brought out, and yet because we're not the right people, so to speak, it's not recognized. So definitely want to give her that recognition that, listen, we know you're working hard, we know that it's out there, and these are the forums and also the connections that we have to be in order to get it heard and out there. So thank you, David, for having this forum for us and all that you guys spoke on before that I was able to learn. So thank you so much.
And is your name also Judith Foster, or you just used her link?
No, I linked her onto my computer and then I use my phone so that I can get in as well.
Sorry, so what's your name?
My name's Jacqueline Thompson.
Nice to meet you, Jack. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other, I think, Margaret, were you about to speak and share something?
Yes, I was thinking about it. Now I'm not sure what the idea of high quality mentorship really resonates with me, and how we can't just plant a bunch of trees. We need really, like Judith, you were saying, we can't be in silos. Everything is interconnected, and we need to be addressing transportation, access, mentorship, the physical nature itself too. But the mentorship piece feels really complicated to me when I think about the way that I benefit from nature. It's not in one way. I have like a bunch of different ways, if I need to go connect with friends, if I need to connect with my very best friends, if I need to kind of get my hands dirty, if I need to reflect, there's different ways. It's not one. And so you don't need to go into nature occasionally. You need to go like as much as possible so you can figure out like what are the ways that you're going to benefit. So that's just a reflection I have. And maybe my question is, in addition to school garden programs and also in addition to Hero, are there other organizations doing, helping to put those mentors out there in Boston that I could look up and connect with?
I got one. Mm-hmm. 10 Boys, 10 Girls. Judy, you work with Don Core.
So Don Core Issa had a program with the Boston Public Schools that I helped him work on, the 10 Boy, 10 Girl Initiative. I know he still has that program, but he's no longer connected with BPS because of the vaccine mandates, and he has a religious exemption, and so he's had to separate from them. But I can connect you with Don Core, Margaret, if you'd like. I'll send the information to David and he can connect it to you.
Sure, thanks.
You're welcome.
Yeah, Margaret, feel free to shoot me, or I can give you Judy's my email. I could drop it in the chat window.
Or my
Judy,
phone number. What you know, I can give you my phone number and you can call me. I do phone better than I do emails.
That's the truth. You want to drop that, or Margaret, I can make the connection. My email is david@treeboston.org. Jeff just put in the chat window a wonderful organization, Eagle Eye. Used to be based out of Somerville. Now I think they're in somewhere out western part of the state or something.
Oh, did they move?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I was thinking they were still.
I think they did. I don't know. I think we're partnering with them for an event later this year. So
Oh, okay.
I think I actually don't know where they are right now.
And for
Go
clarification
ahead.
for anyone, there is a act called the American Outdoor Act that was instituted during the Obama era, but from experts who have said that it doesn't address, actually Rep. Katie Porter out of California's 45th district wrote extensively about it. You guys can Google her article. She says that the difficulties getting to the park, safety, people not feeling welcome, these are all the things that I've experienced with my groups, and I've talked about them as well. So how do we, find solutions to these problems? I think a federal mandate would probably help, not just, again, the silo. Cape Cod has the RX where Boston doesn't have the RX, right? And other states have their outdoor RX version. So you guys can go ahead and research that as well, which again, speaks to the silo working that does not help the whole community. And
I put a really fabulous book into the chat that touches upon a lot of the issues that Jodyann was talking about. It's written by Laura Savoy, and it's called Trace, and it addresses issues of memory, history, and race and the American landscape, and talks a lot about some of those issues, Jodyann, that you were talking about in terms of just the trauma that has occurred on this land, and how that relates to people's orientations and conceptualizations of how they think about their relationship to the land, and give some really powerful examples of the slave ships that were coming over from Africa, and what the water actually represented to those individuals that were on those ships, and how that relates to swimming and being around water, and the trauma that is embedded in folks' DNA that are connected to those ships that came over from parts of Africa. So it's a really powerful read.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Jeff. And my chicken is burning, so I'm gonna have to go. But I wanted to thank you all for joining us today. I'm just gonna make a quick plug for joining us at future events later this week, either in person or virtual. I wanted, again, a big round of applause for our amazing guest speakers, or I shouldn't call them guest speakers, I should call them our what should I call you all? Our savants, our people, our tree people. And I'm gonna close out with a picture, actually, Judith, from our website that includes you at an event back in 2018 or so. There you are, giving away trees at the Hero Nurturing Center with Bill and Amanda and this.
Yeah, I love that picture.
Guy. Yeah, that picture now, just so you know, every time I go to an event at Arbor Day Foundation, this guy Matt Spitzen says, "Hey, I always use this picture." He loves it too.
Yeah, I love that. That was a great event, David, and we're gonna have to top that.
It's gonna be hard to top. So thank you all for joining us. I hope to be able to give you all big hugs soon, out in nature amongst the trees. Big round of gratitude. And I put in Hero Nurturing Center if you're looking to make a donation. The address is in the chat window. The website is in the chat window. And I want to thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, David. Have a great
Thank you,
day.
David.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Yes,
Bye.
thank you all. Bye-bye. Thanks, Jodyann.
Thanks, Jodyann. Thanks, Judy.
Thanks.
Thanks.